We're live.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 40th International Conference on Conceptual Modeling, ER 2021. My name is Jeff Parsons. Jorg Everman, who's seated beside me, and I are the conference co-chairs. We're both faculty members in the Faculty of Business Administration at Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador in St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. So we're here, and you aren't. We'd hoped to welcome you all in person to St. John's, but given the uncertainty around travel, it just wasn't feasible. Instead, we're very pleased to welcome you virtually to the conference. We're using the Hop-In platform, which is new to us, and I suspect to many of you as well. I hope you're all getting used to it by now and are able to take advantage of some of its useful and fun features. For example, you can set up small meetings with others on your own during the conference. You also have the opportunity during the breaks to participate in random pairings with other attendees for brief 3-minute networking sessions, so speed dating, I guess you could call it. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to our Dean, Dr. Isabelle Gostelaar, Dean of Faculty of Business at Memorial University, to say a few words to welcome you.
Thank you very, very much, Jeff, and welcome. To take a few minutes to welcome you all. This is really exciting. I understand, around 130 participants from all around the world. As Jeff said, we're sorry that we cannot welcome you here in St. John's. In particular, Jeff and Jorg today and this week are going to attend this conference from our Signal Hill campus, which is a beautiful campus overseeing the port of St. John's. I guess I'm here to do a little tourism publicity as well. This would have been your opportunity to visit St. John's, visit Newfoundland. So I hope that you'll take this opportunity in the future. So I wish you a great week. I think you have a great program ahead of you. So again, welcome everyone and have a wonderful week with us.
Thank you, Isabelle, for those words. So even though today, this is the official start of the conference really started yesterday with a number of workshops as well as a doctoral symposium. Grateful to the workshop co-chairs, Iris Reinhardt-Berger and Shazia Sadiq, for organizing a successful set of workshops, and to Carson Wu and Vita Story for organizing a great doctoral symposium. And I was able to take part in all of those events, and that mostly went very, very smoothly. So I'm very grateful to everyone. Today, we're moving on to the main program, anchored by a thought-provoking opening keynote by Jan Recker this morning, and a second keynote on Wednesday afternoon by Sudha Ram. In addition to 8 paper sessions, the program features 5 workshops, most of which were yesterday, but there is one today, 5 tutorials, 2 keynotes, 1 panel, and a poster demo session to end the conference. Jorg and I would like to thank all the organizers, authors, reviewers, and presenters. It's your work that makes the conference possible and successful. So, John, if you could advance the PowerPoint presentation. I have a short presentation about the conference. So the theme for this year's conference is conceptual modeling in an era of uncertainty, and obviously that uncertainty is manifested, among other ways, in our late decision to go completely virtual for this conference. So next slide, John, please. So this is where we are. It's the white building there in the center lower picture. This is where you would have been with a great view of the harbor and the city. So I put that in there to sort of tease you in case you ever want to visit. You get to see some beautiful scenery around here. Next slide, John. So this is truly, the ER conference is truly an international conference on conceptual modeling. You can see on this slide our registrations by country, with Germany topping the list, US, Italy, Canada, Spain, a variety of other countries. So it's truly a diverse conference. And the next slide, John. So if you break it down, or if you aggregate it a bit more, you can see most of the attendance here is from Europe, followed by North America, Asia, and so on. So traditionally, I guess it's the ER conference is a large number of European attendees, plus a diverse range of people from other parts of the world. And by the way, I think there are almost 150 registered attendees at the moment. We've been getting registrations right through. I think I saw one last night, the most recent one. Next slide. And so, right, if you look at registrations, this breaks it down by author, student, and non-author. So as you can see, it's a pretty nice distribution. A lot of non-authors participating. I think pointing to the value that people get from participating in the ER conference. Next slide, if there's one. That's it. Okay, so before moving on, I want to give you a very small sense of what you're missing, okay? And I played around looking for a bunch of videos, and there's much I could have shown. And if anyone's actually want to see more of what Newfoundland is like, just shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to point you in the right direction. But I have a 1-minute video. John, if you could cue that up.
Around here, you'll find a symphony unlike any other. But then again, so are the instruments. Newfoundland and Labrador.
Okay, thank you. So next, I'd like to invite the program co-chairs, Jennifer, Vitor, and Aditya, to say a few words about the main program of conference papers.
Hi, everyone. We want to do a quick welcome from the PC chairs. If John can put up the slides, please. There it is. So we have a quick welcome from the PC chairs to ER 2021. So Jeff already brought up the conference theme, conceptual modeling in an age of uncertainty. You know, we have from our website, conceptual modeling has never been more important in this age of uncertainty. As individuals, organizations, and nations face new and unexpected challenges, software and data must be developed that can cope with and help address this new uncertainty in an ever-fastly changing world. Conceptual modeling can be used to describe, understand, and cope with increasing levels of uncertainty in our world. So this is what we plan to discuss throughout the conference. But we have to give a round of thank yous to all of the people that allowed us to perform our job as PC chairs. So we start with the organization. So in the names of our general chairs and our steering committee liaison, we want to thank all the people that participated in the organization committees. We also want to thank our senior PC members. You can see on the list many names. We won't go through all of them. And more even names in our PC members and also additional reviewers that were invited by the PC members to help with the review process. So we have most of them coming from Europe, but PC members that come from all over the world to help make this really an international conference. Finally, big thanks to all the authors who submitted to ER 2021. We had 95 abstract submissions. Turned out to be 85 full submissions, only 6 desk rejections. So we have 79 papers reviewed in total. We had 3 reviews per paper and a quality assurance test that we as PC chairs attempted to perform. And Aditya will talk about that in a minute. Then we had discussion and a meta review written by a senior PC member to conclude the review process. In the end, we had 14 full papers accepted, which turned out to be 16.5% of the submissions, and 18 short papers also accepted through the conference. So these are the statistics taken from EasyChair, authors by region, and also submissions by region. We can also see a predominance of submissions and authors from Europe, but many authors from all over the world also make this an international event. So I'm gonna give the floor to Aditya now to continue this presentation. Hi, Aditya.
Hi, Vitor. Thanks. I just want to briefly talk about the things we tried to do to improve the quality of the reviewing process. Many of us are familiar with the frustration we feel when we get a review that says, you should have added more detail on X or on Y, and we are not quite told what content we should remove to make space for that kind of detail. So that's just one example of the kind of situations we wanted to avoid. So we hassled the program committee, and we're very pleased that most of them took on board our suggestions. So we tried to avoid comments of that sort, or comments where you need to refer to X, Y, and Z, but we don't quite know why we're referring to those things. So there's a whole range of such issues that we brought up, and I think we'll eventually find ourselves making these kinds of quality assurance measures standard in the reviewing process. So that's all I want to talk about. I'm going to hand over now to Jennifer, who will talk about the rest of what we have to say.
Okay, great. So yeah, just a few more words from us. So also welcome on my behalf. It's nice to virtually see everyone. In person would be better, but this is still very nice. So we have, of course, the proceedings, and so you can find them online. If you go under papers and schedules, we have both the full conference proceedings and the workshops proceedings. So feel free to check those out while the sessions are going on. And I think we can move to the next slide. So of course, there's a program available at the website. So we have today's session, and we have 8 technical sessions. And you can see details of this on, of course, the conference website. And also, I think you can see details through this hop-in platform. So long papers have 20 minutes with 10 minutes of discussion. Short have 10 and 5 minutes. And I think we did this in order to try and really facilitate discussion. So don't be afraid to ask questions in the chat or even hopefully out loud. So you can see that we don't have main paper track sessions in parallel. So that's I think really quite nice this year. But of course, we do have these sessions in parallel with some really good tutorials and panels. So you might have to manage your time a little bit in that way. I think we can move to the next slide. So we will, of course, give away some best paper awards. So we'll give away a best student paper and a best overall paper, and this will happen on Thursday. In order to do that, we elicited a committee of ER experts and gave them a short list of papers, and they have made the selection. And so there will be some prizes for that, thanks to Springer. So come back on Thursday to see more about best papers. If we can go to the next slide. There's also going to be a DKA, a Data and Knowledge Engineering special issue for ER 2021. So the best papers, as well as some other highly rated papers, will be invited to extend their work for submission to this journal, with the chief editor being, of course, Carson Wu. So we're looking forward also to this after the conference. And next slide. So yeah, that's basically it for us. So we're very happy to see you all here as much as we can see you. We're really looking forward to a really great program, some really interesting papers, some really high quality papers. And we know, everyone's kind of maybe a little bit of virtual conference fatigue, but we'd like you, bring back your energy and do your best to be as engaged as possible, and to, ask good questions, to have good conversations on on this platform or outside the platform. And we're really looking forward to having a really kind of exciting and engaging conference. So thank you very much from the PC chairs, and I can turn it back over to the organizers again.
Okay, good morning also from me. My name is Jörg Everman. I'm the, next to Jeff, I'm the co-organizer or co-general chair of this conference. And welcome also from me, welcome virtually to Newfoundland. It's my great pleasure this morning to introduce the speaker of the opening keynote, Dr. Jan Recker. Just a few brief words. I've noted down a whole list of things to say about Jan. But just a few points to really raise the expectations, so he has to rise to that. Jan is the Nucleus Professor for Information Systems and Digital Innovation at the University of Hamburg since 2020. Before that, he was a professor at the University of Cologne. Prior to that, he was the professor and Woolworth Chair of Retail Innovation at QUT. Jan received his PhD from QUT, and the reason I'm going back is that I'd like to mention he received his bachelor's and master's from the University of Münster in Germany, which I can personally attest to, is a splendid institution. Jan has published proliferously. I checked this morning, he has over 10,000 citations on Google Scholar, an H-index of 58, and 191 entries in DBLP, and I suspect that's undercounting things, because DBLP, of course, is focused on computer science. Jan is a senior editor with MIS Quarterly. He has been editor-in-chief for the communications of the AIS for 5 years, fairly recently. He has been named a fellow of the AIS. Jan has a book and a podcast on IS research, and if you haven't listened to his podcast, it's well worth listening to. His book is now in his 2nd edition, so that must mean he's reasonably successful with that as well. Now, I did check this morning, and despite the fact that Jan only has 2 papers in the ER conference, and they go way back. There was one in 2006 and one in 2009. But despite that fact, we asked him to deliver the keynote, the opening keynote this morning. If you haven't noted the very interesting paper by Jan and co-authors Roman Lukyanenko, Mohammad Jabari, Binny Samuel, and Arturo Castellanos, that was published in MISQ very recently. The paper is called From Representation to Mediation, a New Agenda for Conceptual Modeling Research in the Digital World. And that paper is very provocative and very forward-looking and makes some very good arguments. And Jan's keynote this morning builds on that. It's titled Making Conceptual Modeling Research Relevant in the Digital Age. And Jan has promised us a somewhat untraditional or unconventional keynote this morning. So I'll shut up now and I'll turn it over to Jan.
Well, good morning also from my end. I hope you can all hear and see me now. Where I am, it's in the afternoon, but I sort of picture the weather is quite similar. I don't know about it, St. John's. It looked lovely on the video. Here it's just gray and rainy and so forth. And, you know, I'm here with a tinge of sadness, of course, because I was really looking forward to a visit to Newfoundland. It's just a stunning place that I always wanted to go to. And, of course, a birthplace of great conceptual modeling research. I'm also, you know, I'm very happy that I can do that. I'm very elated and proud, to be honest, because conceptual modeling, that's sort of my home ground. You know, Jörg was right. It's been a while since I had papers. And it's also been a while, to be honest, that I've actually submitted to ER, but I did submit many more times than I actually got papers accepted and presented, that's for sure. And actually went back to have a look at this, and that's why I wanted to start off with. Because when I did this is what you got, and this was a real thing. You had books with proceedings, and the way where I came from, the way that we handled this is whoever went to the conference and presented, they got to keep the book. So if you look really, really closely in my bookshelf here, there's no book from my first ER conference because I didn't go, so I don't have the book. And I found that out the hard way. This is actually my first book. So it goes 15 years ago, I was at ER for the first time, talking about process modeling, which has always been one of my things, I suppose. But this is not the first time I submitted, of course, to ER. I submitted to ER as early as I got into this game of academia as a first-year PhD student. And I wanted to start off this keynote with a joke by looking up the original review and sort of, you know, finding some comments in there that would be funny or otherwise sort of absurd. But to be honest, when I looked it up the other day, I still have all these reviews. I looked them up and I shrugged and I said, you know what, fair enough. That's actually a pretty good review. I got rejected, and I got rejected many more times ever since, but for good reasons. There were good reviews then, and Aditya, I just listened to you making further improvements to the process. You know, it's always been a competitive process, but a good process. Now, why did I choose this? So this is 15 years ago, and a lot of what Jörg said are sort of signs of me getting fairly old, to be honest. Things like citations and all the other things, they tend to accumulate as you get older. That's the main mechanism driving these things, really. but it also shows you how the times have changed, haven't they? I mean, when I started, we went to conferences, and these books were cherished. And I remember many colleagues, and they still do, who have a proud bookshelf where they try to get all the proceedings in the book right next to one another, and they try to have that without a gap in between. Try to make it to ER every year. And that's sort of the tradition that I grew into. So even if I may or may not seem, maybe a little bit further removed, I don't think that's the case. In my head, I'm still very much a conceptual modeling type of guy, and I still do research on this. A lot, in fact. So in the keynote, when I think about keynotes, I always like the ones that are a little bit more provocative. And not all the keynotes are provocative. They don't have to be, and not all provocative keynotes are welcomed or even liked by people very much. So bear with me if you don't agree with everything that I'm going to present in the following. I'm trying to be a little bit more provocative by design. Yeah. So some of the things I'm sort of putting a little bit more outrageously, a little bit more dramatical than it needs to be, but only because I think this is sort of what keynotes are for. If you want to, for example, Jörg mentioned the paper. You want to read the paper. But I sort of thought I'll try to get some thoughts going that ideally we will still have the time to discuss in this session. And even if we don't, we can have these conversations online and offline, hopefully in the years to come. So I want to start with basically my main provocation. And the question that I want to address in this lecture is whether what we're doing in conceptual modeling still consistent with the reality that we face out there. Yeah. And of course, this wouldn't be a keynote if I said yes. So my first answer, my thesis that I want to present to you today is it's not. Whatever it is that we're doing is not really made to fit to the world that we live in, the world and the way that the world has changed. I think our research has not changed in this way, and it should. Yeah, so that's really what I want to get across for the next couple of days. So I did a little bit of research here. So for example, I did a Web of Science topic search, and that plots citations and publications on conceptual modeling, very broadly construed, over the last, 40 years or so. Yeah. And you see, it's been a core part of scholarship ever since really this field started growing. And there's a couple of inflection points in this graph that sort of boosted it further. But by and large, it's been going and it's been growing steadily for some 30, 40 years. Obviously it drops off at the right, but that's only because not all the newer papers are in that database. The main point here that I want to make, I personally think conceptual modeling, if you think about information systems, that is sort of the core of what we do. We build information systems to represent something that we see in the world because it makes a lot more sense to look at some of these aspects of an information system. So that's really, I think it's always been at the core of our field. The weird thing that has always struck me is, even though it's such a fundamental principle of information systems, it's always been a niche. And let's not make no mistake about it. Everything that we do is not mainstream IS, and it never has been. And neither is it mainstream software engineering or IS engineering and all these other traditions. We've always been a niche. It doesn't matter what discipline we attach ourselves to. Yeah. At the same time, over the last couple of years, we live in a time where a lot of people think, well, our work may even be dying. Yeah, that's not even my word. These are words that are found in paper titles, in keynotes, in opinion papers, in commentaries, and so forth. And here's a couple of examples, right? So Yair and Ron, they wrote about it a couple of years ago, saying like, well, it's just not sexy anymore. We don't have any young scholars coming through. They're shying away from the topic because it's an old technology problem, conceptual modeling. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, is it really? And I myself even wrote this saying like, well, we are under scrutiny. We are, about our validity, applicability, or utility in our changing world. Like, that is the right question to ask ourselves. And we have to confront ourselves with that question. To saying what we're doing in conceptual modeling is really still relevant to the problems that we have out there in the world. Yeah. And there's even sort of, in all these sort of, I guess, debates and these viewpoints, I think what they've done is they've led to confusion, a little bit of insecurity within our group, right? So just as one example from that, a couple of years ago, there was a posting in our AIS community of conceptual modeling scholars, which is SIGSAN, the Special Interviews for Systems Analysis and Design, basically pleading to everybody else, saying like, how can we make our work relevant again in the world of big data, cybersecurity, AI, machine learning? It seems like the world has moved on and technology has moved on, and we have failed to catch up. And there were some interesting responses, I thought, right? So, well, you know, one point that I said, well, we think it's core, but everybody else doesn't think so, right? Or this other point about we just need better ideas, and then we get, you know, more people to come and work on it. So we're not starving anymore with fresh blood coming through. Yeah. So all these things lead to the question of how come? Why did this happen? How did this happen? Yeah. So how did the time from, you know, the big old days, from systems analysis to object-oriented development and UML to the rescue, and even, you know, some of the new process modeling standard, BPMN came, and all that was wonderful, and we had lots of modeling research. And then what happened then? But of course, we all know what happened then. And I'm going to show you a few points about some advances in development over the last 10 or so years that have occurred, which all of you know. So I'm going to go through them reasonably quickly because I don't think there's anything new in this next part here. So one of the first things that has occurred is that information systems, as we construe them, they're no longer part of software that sit behind the back of a computer screen. They are a part and parcel of everyday object and of everyday things as well. Yeah, and you see a few examples here, from self-driving cars to wearable devices to Atlas, the robot that does all sorts of magic tricks and gymnastics and so forth, right? So information systems are no longer just the database of a software system. It's no longer the data model of SAP alone. Yeah. There's a conceptual model underlying the Fitbit wearable, about my Apple smartwatch, about this enormous thing here. Yeah. So we have them in everyday objects these days. That is certainly one of the things that has happened. And there are many of them. Yeah. So over the last 12 or so years, one of the key things that has changed is that we have way more electronic IT-enabled objects on this planet than people. Yeah, around 2008 was the first time that we had about one, you know, technological connected device per person. So it's sort of around 6 billion smartphones and things like this per person. And ever since, smart objects and sort of connected, technologically enabled objects have overtaken the world population by far. And we know some of these phenomena. We talk about the Internet of Things. We talk about smart products and you know, these sorts of devices. So that's not necessarily a new thing, but the question begs whether we have accounted for that enough in conceptual modeling. And I'll get back to that in a bit. Well, the other thing that has occurred is not only do we have more technology objects that have information systems in them, and they're not just software anymore, we also have a very different definition of agency. We now have products that are created by algorithms, not by people. The slides or the images that you see here is from work that I've been doing with some friends with video game publishers. Now, video game publishers are sort of like digital native companies, right? So they've always lived in the digital space. They only create digital products, software only. And they've always been at the forefront of sort of algorithmic advances, new tools, data-driven operations, all these sorts of things that come more natural to businesses that only operate in the digital-only world. So what you see here, for example, are certain generative algorithms, AI algorithms that sort of generate landscapes in video games by themselves. Yeah. So there's no human creating these roadmaps on the terrain that you can see here on the left-hand side. That's all done by an algorithm that populates incredibly vast sort of game landscapes. Most people now say like, oh yeah, that's only video game. That's only a bit of playful digital experience. Well, I don't think so. So when we studied them and went to their studios where they developed them, that's a cutthroat business, number one. It's bigger than Hollywood. And also, this is not only restricted to digital-only companies. These ideas about algorithms, designing objects, designing products, designing systems have long taken over and long came out of the digital-only world and come into our reality. This is another case that we've been working on, which is the so-called hack rod. The hack rod is a sports car, and you can see here on the left-hand side. And the hack rod is built almost entirely through artificial intelligence, with only two people none of which know anything about how to manufacture a car. Yeah. So the hack rod is a car that has been generated by a generative design engine that came up with a chassis, has been 3D printed with a particular printer that can print titanium steel alloy. All the testing and test driving was done in a virtual reality simulation. Yeah. And there's only 2 people involved, one of which was a Hollywood actor, and the other guy was someone that worked for a toy company, Hasbro, the company that makes little toy cars. They wanted to show that basically that anyone can build anything if you know the technology. You don't have to know how to build cars. You don't have to know anything about manufacturing anymore to be able to do this. Yeah. Third example is getting even more closer to, sort of human basic products. We also have stuff that you can eat that are generated by algorithms, not by people anymore. This is from this really interesting MIT student project, how to generate almost anything.com, where a bunch of students have taken AI algorithms to create all sorts of products, from very tangible, like pizza toppings, to very ephemeral, perfume, and even piano lessons. And most of you would have heard last week that Beethoven's 10th Symphony was now completed by an AI algorithm, and then sort of performed by an orchestra somewhere in Germany. So these things are happening, and they're not only happening in video games and other types of digital-only spaces or sort of kids play. They are, we have cars that are being produced, we have symphonies that are being produced, pizzas and perfumes and all sorts of other things created dominantly by algorithms, not by people. Yeah. And of course, this trend is going to accelerate even further. This is just a chart from PwC about investment into AI. Again, I'm not even debating here whether, what we call AI is even AI, or whether all that research is meaningful that's being conducted, but just the sheer amount of funding that goes into this research inevitably will lead to all sorts of advances. So we have more things that can do more things and are getting even better at this. And none of the things are human, and they're further and further detached by humans as well. And another example of these changes over the last couple or 10 years or so is that increasingly we see business doing very physical, traditional organizational design work based on something that happens in the digital world first. Yeah, so the left example, Woolworth, is from 2013 when I was working them in Australia. Jörg mentioned that. And at that time, mobile shopping came up big, and they had their little Woolworth mobile shopping app where you can actually shop online, and someone would deliver all the broccoli and all the stuff that you order, would deliver it to your house or to your gas station where you could pick it up. And that grew so large that they decided to build a store only for online order fulfillment. Now, this is a supermarket store like any other, like your Rewe, your Tesco, your Walmart, your Aldi, your Woolworth store, with the difference that it doesn't have any customers inside. Only all the materials that you would have for online fulfillment, all the stuff that people order online. And they had no idea how to build it. They had no idea. They said, well, we only know how to build a store that would entice the customers to come in, get the good vegetables first, but also get the Snickers bar at the end, and sort of make a maze out of the shelves and aisles, so people spend as much time as possible in the store and grab us as many cross-selling products on the way as they possibly can. That's how they knew. That's how they run retail business, bricks and mortar, for a long time. They had no idea how to do online order fulfillment, where none of that is relevant, where the only thing that's relevant is operational excellence and efficiency and maintaining the cold chain if you want to buy ice cream, for example. Yeah. So they called it a dark store because it never saw the light of day, so to speak. And that's been happening ever since. On the right-hand side, you see Walmart a couple of years later, where they've been redesigning not just one store for online fulfillment, they've been redesigning all their stores to fit better what people were doing in digital online shopping, and that whatever was left for a physical reality of a normal shopping center. Yeah. So only the stuff that you wouldn't buy online, you would get there. You can get a lot more configurable sort of quick meals there, but not your tin cans of tuna and your bread loaves and all these sorts of things that you would buy online anyway. So digital first models of a domain existed long before real world objects. Yeah. And a fourth and final change that I wanted to bring attention to is that with a lot of changes that we have seen in how organizations now develop information systems, technology, how they run projects, and how they organize work in general, a lot of them can be equated to this point of everyone is a systems analysis and designer. Nothing special about it anymore. Ever since the days of agile methodologies and Scrum and product coaches and DevOps, where operations and sales people and service people come together with our developers and sit in the same room and so forth, all of that amalgamates to there's no distinct profession anymore. There's no professional designer anymore. Everyone's a designer now. We have the product coaches and the customer representative and the Scrum master sitting right next to the guy that's actually building the database. And they all have a fair and equal say in how this is being done. And of course, on the right-hand side, you see some examples of, well, we even have software doing our models for us now, right? Process mining, by no means no idea anymore. It's been around for 10, 20 years. But now it's gotten to the stage where you can create conceptual models of your domain, whatever it is, by the click of a button. Yeah. So what do we need the analysts for anymore? Why do we need the people that are skilled in all the methods and tools and languages that we use for conceptual modeling? We weren't even sure we needed them to begin with. Yeah. And it doesn't even stop there in the organizational sphere. It also carries over into private life. Yeah, if you look at my oldest son is now getting into the age where you can seriously think about getting him a Mindstorm robot, so he can start programming himself, which looks very different to when I started programming. Now you have these things called drag and drop. It's all part of video games and Lego robots, and you can all start building their own little software. My wife designs her own web pages. Everyone has a blog. I have a podcast. You know, we all build all sorts of systems all the time, not even for work. So really, again, we have what used to be a very clear distinction between roles and professions and people that were doing conceptual modeling, and it's now all just a blurry mess. Now, I've picked all these things for a reason, of course, because all the 4 or 5 changes that I've shown you, I think, have very clear implications to conceptual modeling. These are not just any changes that have come through the digitalization of society. These are all changes that directly and fundamentally speak to some principles of conceptual modeling. And of course, I'm going to say, have we kept up with these changes, with these developments that have been accruing over the last 10 years? No, of course not. I mean, not of course not, but no, of course, my thesis is we have not. What we still do is this. Yeah, a lot of you will recognize this. This is from a commentary piece that Yair and Ron wrote about 20 years ago. That sort of sets the stage for conceptual modeling to become a mainstream topic, at least in the sort of management IS type of field. And I looked it up. This commentary is not only the most cited sort of definitional piece on conceptual modeling, it's actually the most cited research commentary in that particular journal. So it's been very influential and characterized a lot of the research for the last 20 years. But of course, it was written in the 90s. So when you look at the paper, it talks about process reengineering. It talks about the advent of enterprise and enterprise resource planning systems, SAP speak. It talked about the fact that these models get fairly large, so like a couple of hundred of entity types. And of course, it had research opportunities that have nothing to do with everything that came afterwards, because the internet was 4 years old by the time it was written. And there was no mobile, there was no analytics, there was no cloud, there was no social, all these different elements that we have come to get used to by now over the last 10 years were of course not on the horizon of these people, on all these papers. So one of the pieces that we've done is we had a look at what happened since. And we try to be really inclusive. We really didn't want to make this only an IS type of thing. So we really picked the journals that we felt were representing conceptual model scholarship in a broad sense. So we picked Journal of Database Management, IEEE Transaction Engineering, Elsevier's Information Systems. So really, we thought journals where work would appear that speaks to all the different flavors of our community, because it is broad, diverse, and heterogeneous, and I know this very much. Yeah. But sort of what we looked at what have we been doing over the last 20 years? And essentially, I'm making this a little bit simple here. Essentially, what we're doing is we're taking 2 models with 2 languages, and we give it to a bunch of students in an experiment, and then we later look at who understands the most. Can you infer the same from UML class diagram than from ER diagram? Can you take an ER diagram with cardinalities and graph feed notation, or one with an max notation, and which one is more understandable? Is BPMN as understandable as Petri nets or event-driven process chains? A lot of the research that we've been producing over the last 20 years is of that nature. The second most research that we've been producing is sort of coming up with methods for how to model. Yeah, developing procedures to assist users of a grammar. This is how you can use UML in an ontologically better way, in an ontologically worse way, in sort of as guided by cognitive principles, as guided by some other principles, all of them the same. And the third main research is about what about that professional systems analysis and design Kai? What personality variables, what cognitive variables? Is experience more important than expertise? You know, these are the questions that by and large we have pursued over the couple of years. And that, I think, is sort of still outdated. It's becoming outdated and irrelevant, incredible. What we've also done, we've carried forward some very stable assumptions. Yeah, and sort of like the fundamental principles by which we believe in about what conceptual modeling is and what it's supposed to be doing and what are we actually researching. Yeah, and I'm not saying that stable assumptions are bad. Stable assumptions are good, and they indicate that this field, this community is agreeing on a core. So we all know what we're talking about. We have a sort of established, mature set of methods. We know how to evaluate each other's work. So all of these are good things, but it also means that we're growing stale and we're becoming incredibly more incremental, puzzle-oriented, and a little bit boring, so to speak. Yeah, and some of these are really dominant. Yeah, for example, look at the bottom left where I say, like, what is the context, the conceptual modeling context? That's a big bubble by Jan and Weber, the round oval that goes around everything in conceptual modeling. Well, what we mean by it in all the papers that we looked at, except for two, we mean an organizational professional work setting. We mean the IT department or some analyst that works in some department and models some organizational process or setting. Yeah. We also mean, as humans, the actors, the people that are involved with modeling, well, we mean professional analysts. In fact, many of my own papers, I've been writing entire paragraphs, if not pages, why the students and whoever else I used are reasonable proxies of professional analysts, why I can compare my data to what a normal professional analyst would do. Yeah. So we've been building that into our main narratives and argumentation that we've been doing this. We also, most of the time, we mean, when we talk about modeling, we mean a model of the physical reality of our world out there. Yeah, so the world that is out there. And we bother a lot about whether that reality is really out there or whether it's socially constructed and how we socially construct that reality and whether the ontologies that we use as a benchmark are even a good approximation of that. But the fundamental thing is that we still think that models are meant to represent a reality out there. Yeah. And a structure focus that probably needs a little bit of explanation because that is a term from Wand and Weber. What I mean with this is sort of what we model are the semantics of what the core of that information system is. In simple terms, the database structure, the model of the database structure that describes these are the entities, these are their properties, these are their relationships. Or in process terms, it would say these are the main events and these are the time action, these are the key business rules. Away from any technical infrastructure that we use to implement this, away from any surface structure of the interface, how we're going to approach and use that system. We just mean the semantics normally. You know, these are the key elements of the domain that we need to have represented in our system, because otherwise it's not a good model of reality. And virtually all of the work that we're doing have only been focused on that without looking at, well, on what infrastructure does the system run? Is it going to be run on a laptop? On a smartphone, on my smartwatch, even though I can only tap on this and the screen is even too tiny for a 40-year-old to read it anymore. And it sort of buzzes weirdly around my ankle all the time. But, you know, it's really weird interface, but apparently that doesn't matter. Yeah. So these are the sort of things that we've been using for 20 years. And of course, I'm going to argue that has created a chasm, a widening gap with time over the last 20 years that led us to be where we are and which is not where the world has come to. right? So if I bring it down, we work off the assumptions that we build conceptual modeling scripts, models to represent reality. But the reality is that our reality is already shaped by what's going on in digital reality. How the hell are you going to build a supermarket store that does whatever is left over from online shopping if you don't model that first? Yeah. We also still think that scripts are produced and consumed by humans. And that is completely neglected, that a lot of these digital objects, all these technology and systems, they have material agency on their own. They're getting better at doing all sorts of things, including things that we traditionally thought were reserved for humans. They're building products, they're executing transactions, they're building and printing things. So they do a lot of things that we do. We have entire algorithms that can read transcripts from user interviews and create a conceptual model much better than my students can. Yeah. And we have, thanks to Will and his colleagues, we have brilliant algorithms that create the best process model that I've ever seen, and none of which I could have created myself. Yeah. We also still think that our job is to only model semantics that reside in the deep structure. So sort of like the main conveyance of the semantic information about the reality that we do convey. We don't need to worry about what's on the interface, let alone what is the technical infrastructure. But of course, we now have, since information systems are no longer just the backend database structure of some SAP system or some other system that sits on my laptop, but they're in everyday things, these distinctions are blurred. I cannot think about a Fitbit or a smartwatch without looking at what are the sensors that connect to my bodily measurements and what options do I even have to interact with these things. It has one button and I can tap on it. That's about it. Yeah. But on the other hand, I can talk to it and it talks back. It's a little bit like my kids, really. Yeah. So that's a key part of how some of these systems operate. I mean, there's smart home devices where I need to clap, and if I clap once, something happens. If I clap twice, something else happens. If I change my clapping rhythm, all sorts of things happen. How's that not connected to the conceptual model of these systems? Yeah. And finally, we still think that conceptual modeling is a task for analysts and designers in organizational work settings, often in an IT department. Doesn't have to be that one, but that's where it happens. Whereas, in fact, we both use and develop these sorts of systems in everyday life, everywhere, all the time, without blurring. I mean, what I'm doing here is speaks to this, right? I mean, at any moment, this door can burst open and my little sons or one of them can come in and demand my attention while we're trying to give a provoking keynote lecture. Yeah. So all of this culminates in the thesis, of course, that we need to change something. We need a new path. We need to think about conceptual modeling differently from what we have in the past. And with a change in view comes a change in assumptions and a change of the type of research that we produce. Yeah. So I'm not saying we need to discard everything that we've done. We shouldn't. Yeah. It's been a proud tradition, and it's been a tradition that has served us and the field really, really well. But we just can't continue like that forever. We need to relax. We don't need to overhaul these assumptions. We need to take them a little bit broader. Yeah. So this is probably the closest that I'll get to this particular paper that Jörg mentioned. But in that paper, we've been trying to come up with a view of what that new path could look like. And when you look at the author teams, let me just quickly comment on that. Roman, Mohammed, Bini, Arthur, and me. And I'm by far the oldest. And this is not by happenstance. I think all the other four guys are really what I thought for a long time are the sort of the young, fresh brains of conceptual modeling that do incredibly interesting research. And it's just different to whatever else we've been doing for a long time. It's exciting, it's novel, it's relevant, it's interesting. So, we came together and thought like, okay, what are you guys doing differently? So what can we learn from it as a field for some of us that have been around a little bit longer? Why do you think see some of these things differently and therefore get to some research? I just really think that they're more interesting, right? Arthur Arturo does work on conceptual modeling and machine learning and AI. Yeah. Bini does it in analytics, and Roman has been doing stuff in the context of citizen science and crowdfunding. That's just exciting. And to be honest, I hadn't seen such exciting research for a while until that point. So this is what we've come up with. We try to create a framework that is similar in spirit to this framework of Yair and Ron that has served us greatly and enormously for a long time. So a lot of these things sound different and look the same. Sound the same and look the same because they're meant to be the same. So we still think that conceptual modeling is about scripts. Yeah, as an outcome of us using a grammar and applying certain procedures that are stipulated by rules and principles and tools and techniques to generate a script. One of the additions that we think is really necessary that we have to focus on, well, who's the agent here? Who does all of that? Who produces and consumes? Who uses this grammar? What are these people, or what are these agents doing? How are they doing this? How did they come to know this? This is an addition that this focus wasn't really prominent in that original framework. The other key extension is that we're saying, well, all of that isn't just about our normal reality anymore, or social reality anymore. This is also happening in a digital reality. In these two worlds, they can overlap. Yeah, we have a physical reality with physical reality. I mean, sort of like the reality out there with physically as well as socially constructed things. Yeah, but we also have that digital reality, and sometimes we're operating in this one part of reality, sometimes in this other, and sometimes we're moving in between, and the scripts are everywhere around us. And of course, all of that happens within a context, but that context is a lot wider. I don't mean the organizational context. No, I mean the context of our realities, which is a coexistence, physical and digital reality with objects and events that are happening, with lots of objects that couple surface deep physical structures and blur all these boundaries between typical denotations like here's work, here's life. You may have seen here, Oscar just came in. He's blurring my work life and home life all the time, every time. Yeah, exactly. Right, so that's happening all the time. And we have to deal with it. 1 second, I'll have to deal with this. Right, as if I have timed him. Yeah. So this is still, and we chose to use a conceptualization, a conceptual model of the conceptual modeling framework that speaks to the old reality, but of course it looks a little bit more complicated here, right? And this, we think, is a nice way of looking and broadening just the range of things that we can now climb and saying, well, all of that is conceptual modeling. Conceptual models are not just about data models. I grew up in a period of time in the scholarship where I had to defend my interest in process modeling. Because a lot of other conceptual models said all the time, that's process modeling, that's not conceptual modeling. Why not? All of them are conceptualizations of a domain. We still represent part of reality, just happens to be on processes, not on entities. Where's the difference? Why do we care about that difference? Yeah. Now, the key thing here is that because the script is not just about representation of physical reality anymore, we also have this digital reality. Now, that means all of a sudden the function of the script changes. It's not just about we take a piece of reality and map it into a script. The script can also translate. It might execute. It might change. Yeah. And of course, it can still represent. The question is then one. Yeah. Sorry, I just saw the chat. So that is happening as well. So with this script being placed at the intersection of multiple realities produced by methods and grammars through an agent within a broader context, means that inevitably there's more to a script, more to a model than just represent. I'm not saying it's unimportant. It's still key and it's still fundamentally important to building better systems. Absolutely. But the question is, what are we actually representing here? And is representation all that we do? Or are we representing to change? Are we representing to execute? Are we representing to translate between different realities? Yeah. So in the paper, I'm going to skip that here, but in the paper, what we see is that we can take the same fundamental terminology that a lot of us use and in some way or other that we're all familiar with, and we're just updating them. And when you look closely at how we suggest that we reword them, none of them are inconsistent. They're just a bit broader, a little bit more relaxed about it. We say, well, there's not just one reality. It's not just physical. It could be physical and or a digital reality. Yeah. A grammar is a set of construct and rules that show how to combine the constructs. Hello, Yair and Ron. But we use it to model physical and or digital domains of reality. a conceptual modeling agent that wasn't actually defined, funnily enough, but implicitly assumed to be a human agent, we just say, well, it could be human or a digital agent that produces or consumes scripts. Yeah. So we're continuing our path of scholarship in conceptual modeling because we think it's been a good one. We're just trying to relax it and in case sort of think of a funnel that opens up rather than closes. We're not changing the direction. We're just allowing more directions to come in. And I think that's the way to go in attracting new talents, in allowing other types of research to be born and bred, allowing other papers to be presented at the ER conferences, and just in general being a little bit more heterogeneous and inclusive than we have been in the past. Yeah. So really, we're talking about not replacing our assumptions, but relaxing them. Yeah. So from the representation assumption that scripts are about physical reality, we say, well, they can be about physical and digital realities. And importantly, then maybe they also mediate the transitions between the two in some shape or form. Yeah. Mediation could mean translation, could mean changing, could be execution, could just be mere modeling, mere mapping, so to speak. Yeah. Scripts are not longer only about the deep structure. They should also take into account any couplings that may exist between what's in the deep structure, what the semantics are about what its information system handles, together with relevant parts of the technical infrastructure and relevant parts of the human-computer interface that we use to sort of interact with the system. What good does it do me if I have a conceptual model of a database that I can't access? Yeah, or that is not communicable or sort of transmittable through the internet because that part of that infrastructure isn't actually connected to the internet. It's a very different ballgame to a thing that exists entirely in the cloud. Agency, I talked about that a lot, about consumed by human and digital agents. And it occurs inside and outside of organizations. So if you believe, if you trust some of these ideas, if you just want to follow some of the ideas, I think that gets where the interesting part is. Then I think we can allow ourselves to make 4 changes in how we think about conceptual modeling and how we do research about that. The biggest change to us is that we need to move away from grammars and method as the key conceptual modeling artifacts. Again, these are 2 charts from that literature review that we done, and we see nothing surprising here. Most of the work is about grammars and methods, and most of the stuff is about UML, and followed by ER, and then a whole bunch of other types of grammars. Yeah, so that's what we've been doing, and we think a much more interesting key artifact of our research should be the script. Forget about the grammar for a second. Yeah, that's not even a new thing in some fields, right? So, for example, in process modeling, in process management, where we've been, that's the sort of area where I'm most familiar with. We have already shifted. We used to work a lot about how do we use a grammar like EPC, PetriNet, BPMN of generally capturing what goes on in a domain in a particular process. Well, we don't do that very much. Now we have process mining. We just create a whole bunch of individual scripts that tell us what happens every one sequence, every single one of them. Yeah, and we don't need a model on the class level if we have all the data and all the representation that we need on the instance level. Yeah, and we've seen similar moves in other parts of conceptual modeling scholarships as well, as we move from classes to instances which are script level, not grammar level. Yeah, and one of the particular interesting research challenges that I think are happening here is that scripts by definition can be ungrammatical. They can violate the grammatical rules that are stipulated in the grammar. Why not? I can build an ER diagram where all sorts of arrows go from all sorts of boxes to other boxes, even though the ER diagram notation doesn't allow me to do this. I can still draw it. Yeah, we've seen this in many parts, especially in process modeling for a long time, that people do all sorts of things with them, and a lot of that violates the grammatical rules. And no, the syntax isn't correct and the semantics isn't correct. Who cares? The script is a script, and it does what it does, and it becomes very interesting. And if we allow for these changes to be okay in the sense of that we say that's still a script. It may not be grammatical, but it's still a script and it's still a conceptual model of something. Then we can start investigating all sorts of other types of scripts that are out there. And I brought 2 examples, which to me are both conceptual modeling scripts, but they look nothing like any of them, the ones that we're used to. Yeah, the one on the left-hand side it's not one script, but in that article, there's a whole range of conceptual models that try to model in that particular case, how Trump was connected to the Russians. It's a bit older, but it has all sorts of graphs in there. It has sort of something that looks like a social networking type of graph. It has sort of something that looks like an activity chart, but not quite. It has an entity like a class diagram with cardinalities, but not quite. On the right-hand side is a dynamic article about AI and fairness and courtroom decisions. And as you step through this article, you, the reader, is meant to interact and engage with different models of making a fair courtroom decisions about who should go to jail and should be released and so forth. Yeah, and these are all conceptual modeling scripts. And depending on what you do and where you click and what you do with these models and how you sort of stipulate your assessments there, the rest of the article changes. How is that not a script? How is that not a model that represents what goes on in the courtroom? Yeah, it has characteristics of entities. The entities are being offenders, for example. Yeah, it has particular characteristics, namely in this case, things such as gender, racial ethnicity, and stuff like that, and social upbringing, and they are related to one another, and so forth. So it really is just an ER diagram that looks really fancy. Yeah. So these are modern scripts, and we need to pay attention to them. Yeah. The second huge change, I think, is that our dependent variable that we should be interested in is not just understanding or level of domain understanding or model comprehension or whatever else people call it, because scripts do more than just represent a reality. We should not stop at asking whether the analyst that we give an ER diagram or a class diagram or whatever type of diagram, whether they're able to read it. Yeah, we need more diverse set of dependent variables than just domain understanding. Don't have that graph right here, but we can show you that that really is our key dependent variable, and we should ask ourselves whether that's really the main dependent variable that we should become known for, whether people can read a model. Yeah. So representation, of course, remains important because there's still analysts and designers doing very traditional conceptual modeling work. Even in the age of agile and so forth, that's very important in practice and fundamentally important. If people can't read a script, they do mistakes. No question about that. But there's more to it. Yeah, scripts do more. And again, I brought you some examples. One of them is about a conceptual model that stipulates how two entirely digital agents communicate with one another. Yeah, Bet Protocol and Bet Connect. These are companies that specialize on sports betting and esports betting and stuff like that. They use blockchain technology and sort of organize and operate sports bets between two different agents, one of which produces the script and the other one executes it without any human intervention whatsoever. So we have one piece of algorithmic engine that draws data from trusted web sources such as the CNN sports webpage and looks up sports results and feeds it into an oracle that then operates a particular sports bet that was done and sort of stored on a trustable blockchain database to see who gets how much paid out by whom, and then runs the banking transactions. Yeah, there's translation happening between the realities as we have modeled them for the different agents, none of which is human. Yeah, none of this works without a model for what data do I need? What are my entities? What are relevant properties? What is the process that I'm executing? What steps, what events am I monitoring? Which actions am I taking? What is the business rule? So it has exactly the same elements that we put into our ER diagrams and activity diagrams for 20 years, but there's no person involved anymore. You just so happen that somewhere in Liverpool a team plays and the next day you've lost a bit of money. Yeah. Different example is that we also have conceptual modeling scripts fundamentally impacting not just a translation, not just a representation, but a change affecting. My personal best example for this is always wearable devices, sort of health wearable devices that try to motivate us to sort of exercise more, go out, see the world, be sporty and active, take the steps, stand up every hour and so forth. My wristband is telling me to do that. Yeah, and it's effective in that too, right? All of that, however, depends, in my view as a model, it all depends on whatever is stored in that conceptual model that is underneath that. Yeah, to give you one example for this, so these modern generations of these wearable devices, they can measure your blood oxygen level. Yeah, so that's a health not important feature to have, and they can sort of tell you a little bit about what your blood oxygen levels mean. During the COVID pandemic, all of a sudden there was a genuine interest in blood oxygen levels, because apparently that's a really good marker for whether or not you're becoming infected with the virus. Okay, that's pretty cool, right? So it can actually really affect certain changes based on properties, the hardware, not the deep structure, the infrastructure of the system has. Yeah. By the way, it then turned out that that sensor that this wristband has here, when it's connected to my arm, it's not calibrated enough, it's not precise enough to get the level of detail that, you know, it would be useful as a biological marker. But that's not my point. My point is that it actually has something to do with how the interface reacts with the model of the semantics, as well as with some very physical infrastructure things, such as where is it located? What's the sensor? How good is the sensor? What is it actually picking up? How can I interact with this, right? And all of that, you know, influences not just representation, but really how we act, because these things tell us increasingly what we should be doing and when. So if you buy into this argument that I'm presenting here, that there's more to it than this representation, and we say there's mediation in the sense of translation, change, execution, and representation, then we can start thinking about some exciting new dependent variables. Yeah, so I've tried to think of a few here, and they're by no means complete. I'm not even sure they're really good. Yeah, so we still have representation, and level of domain understanding is, of course, an appropriate variable for that. It makes a lot of sense, and we've worked for decades on figuring out how to best to measure it and so forth. So we shouldn't abandon that. We should just expand it a little bit. So, for example, when we think about translation, and translation between the BET protocol engine and the CNN website with the information about sports and the Oracle agent that's executing a financial transaction, what is even being translated? How much information loss is occurring? What if something happens out here? What if we find out later that the game is rigged? Is the Oracle agent smart enough to rewind that payment and give it back to us because we figure out that some Liverpool guy cheated? Yeah. How is that happening? How much information loss are we surrendering in translation? Or are we protecting ourselves against that? I think that's an interesting variable. When we think about change, I always think change is a nice way of connecting that to distance measures. So how distance are we after a change versus before a change? Some old aspect or a new aspect of reality. People that are interested in change use that. Why don't we? Yeah. And finally, execution. As soon as you start execution, you can think performance. And performance, as we know, can mean all sorts of things. It could cover utilitarian, operational excellence type of dimensions, like its efficacy or effectiveness or productivity by time or whatever. But it could also, of course, cover all sorts of other dimensions, sustainability, ethicality, health-related aspects of performance, what have you. Yeah. So the key thing that I wanted to bring forth here is that if we start thinking about new forms, new functions that a script performs, we're opening up our array to dependent variables that are really worth looking at. And also, I'll get back to that in a second, that others have already looked at, and we can start working with them. Third implication is we should start taking the CM agent more seriously. Number one, humans don't have to be professionals. Yeah. Again, a little bit of our own work with some other friends. We've done a big review part and an empirical part, so an empirical review paper on the type of ways in which we characterize human agents, so the people that do modeling and that read models, that create and consume models. And you see some of these dimensions here. We talk about students or practitioners. We talk about knowledge, duration, level of education, familiarity with grammars, and how often they've seen a UML script before and stuff like that. But of course, they don't have to be professionals. They don't even have to be humans. Yeah. So one of the key research challenges that we have here is, number one, we know nothing about digital conceptual modeling agents. We know a little bit about human conceptual modeling agents, but only based on the assumptions that they're probably professional analysts and designers. But we know nothing about digital agents. How do we conceptualize these? Yeah. So just as an idea, again, I don't think that's the best idea. It's just one idea to get us going. So we could think about autonomous digital agents as having a level of autonomy from very little to very high, to have an ability to learn from data and experience, so they can self-improve. Some ML algorithms or unsupervised algorithms can do that better than others, of course. And they're more or less inscrutable, more or less explainable to certain audiences, could be other humans or not, or could be other types of agents, right? That would be one way of starting to think, okay, this is how digital conceptual modeling might be different. They might be more or less autonomous, they might be more or less able to learn and improve, and they might be more or less understandable and intelligible to us. And that already makes it different from human agents that are more or less experienced, have more or less expertise, and have more higher or lower levels of familiarity with modeling. Yeah. And the fourth big change is that we need to emphasize the context. The context is no longer the organization. The context could be anything that's intertwined in physical and digital realities. And the key challenge here for us, I think, is number one, to go out and study the digital context, because again, we have nothing on that one. What's a model in an entirely digital context? And what the hell is an intertwined context? Yeah, like in augmented reality. How do I don't even know how to describe that. Yeah. How do we deal with these two different types of contexts and figure out what is different to what a typical context of conceptual modeling work is? Yeah. So in my head, it's a huge difference if we have a context change such as, I don't know, elderly people trying to be active is surely different to what I'm doing with a Fitbit. Is surely different to what a 15-year-old would do with this. Yeah. And of course, augmented reality, all of that gets really tricky and complicated, I think. Yeah. Augmented reality works, of course, of conceptual model that underlies and tells us where weird rat monsters spawn in the physical reality. Yeah. But it also matters, physical aspects of that context also matters. Where is it? Can I get to it? Is it even legal to go there? Yeah. Is it dangerous? So all these things come together and somehow they're being put in the script that runs Pokemon. Yeah. So we need to figure out how to do this so to be able to understand how an augmented context, beyond a video game, is also a context in which conceptual modeling occurs. And, this is just a screenshot of, I mentioned that Oracle script that does the sports betting. This is basically part of the source code. So here we have a context that's entirely digital. And I have no idea of what to tell you about it. I have no idea. I don't know what I can say about that context other than it's just a bunch of source code that runs in the cloud on certain pieces of technology. Yeah, but that's also a context in which that occurs, where there's the winner, and the winner has a attribute called winner ID, and it has a score, and it competes against some other team that also has a score. So there's typical modeling elements here that we need to grab our hands around. So fifth thesis, I'm getting to the end here, is, again, if we buy into these changes, what does it mean for us? How do we do research? So number one, it means that we need to collaborate more and for real this time. Yeah, this is not a new argument, interdisciplinarity, collaboration, and zoom. And then a lot of people would come and say, I'm already doing this. Well, I don't think we are. Yeah. So to me, it's not interdisciplinary if I start working with my marketing colleagues. And I don't think it's interdisciplinary if a formal computer scientist talks to a software engineer either. This is pretty much all the same thing from a larger perspective. We need to really talk and work with people that we haven't worked with so far. Yeah. So what that also implies then is that we can put to rest some debates that we've been having for a long time, which are entirely internal only to this field. Yeah. Is it scripts or is it models? Is it methods or is it techniques or is it grammars? Is it notation or is it language, or is it syntax or is it semantics? Yeah. Do we need domain-specific languages or general languages? Which ontology is the best? Is it that one or this one or that one? These are all debates where I hope you agree we all have been having, and we've all have particular stakes in this and particular views on this and so forth. But if you're also being very honest, no one outside this particular community cares about these things. Yeah. So these are things that we, within the sort of trenches of that stable paradigm that we got into ourselves into, that we can worry about these things. Out there, no one would really care because no one knows what the difference between a script and model might even be, and they haven't heard about 27 of the ontologies that we've produced either. Yeah. So instead, if we accept some of the idea that we have a different context, that if we have multiple types of agents, that scripts do more than represent, and that we need to model more than only deep structure semantics, then we can readily work with others outside of our core ER, IS engineering, systems analysis and design community, because other people have already started studying dependent variables other than understanding. Performance, I can name you 1,000 scientists that study performance. Yeah. We talk about distance and change and information loss. All of these things have been studied before by other people. They just haven't been studied by us. Yeah. Others have started to research digital agent. A lot of the research around AI and managing AI is about what is AI and how can we describe it and how can we manage it and so forth. So it's not that people haven't looked at digital agents before. Yeah. And of course, others have also already started to examine digital and digital physical and sort of digitally infused and digitally enabled context. So again, that's not necessarily new. It might just still be a little bit new to us. So with that, all that said, I come to the end of provoking you with my last provocation. And I think what has happened is that our main strength has become our main weakness. And what I mean with this is I think that the YAG community has been pretty diverse in the sense of that by its very nature, it's always been nestled between different types of fields, computer science, software engineering, information systems, and a little bit even beyond that. So that has always been the case. And we've lived to tolerate and accommodate and sort of be inclusive of that, which has been a great strength of us. But with the same diversity, it also means that we've had heterogeneity, and we also means that we don't really have a huge core. And we've had a fair few wars within our field from between the different camps and the people sitting in the camps and the terminologies that they use and so forth. Yeah. So I think it's time to sort of stop worrying about ourselves, stop opening up a little bit and starting to the other ones. Yeah. So that's just, it sounds a little bit more provocative than I mean it. But I do think there's a huge opportunity because, I still think everything in conceptual modeling connects to the reality out there. The other day, someone asked me about a very different work of mine and asked me whether I see connections to conceptual modeling and what I was doing. It was about startups. And I said, I'm a conceptual modeler. I see a conceptual model everywhere. Yeah, everything that I do and that what we do is about conceptual modeling. Whether I see a funny news report about Trump and Putin and Russia, whether I see a sports bet somewhere, or whether I see Pokemon Go or Mario Kart on somewhere. To me, all of that is fundamentally connected, which is, I think, the great strength of our field is that what we really do is really at the core of all this digital enablement and so forth. And with these notes, I'm going to end my presentation and my keynote here, and I look forward to hopefully some questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jan. This was a very thought-provoking and very provocative keynote. I consider myself provoked. I'm going to open it up for questions. Please pop your question to Jan in the chat. And Jan, if you don't mind, you can self-moderate and pick up the questions on the chat there.
Okay.
And see what you make of that.
I'm just going to read here. Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. I'm reading the longish comment by Bernhard. Revolutions sometimes nice and mostly bad and so forth. I agree. So I've in this keynote I've sort of emphasized a little bit the difference. I talked a lot about the digital agent, sort of at the emphasis of the agent and neglecting the fact that of course there's coexistence here, right? Then I'm not saying that any of them are taking over. And at the same time, I'm not saying we should abandon everything. What I've tried to do is sort of relax a little bit and open ourselves up a little bit to be a little bit more inclusive of some of these things, that we worry about things such as augmentation, coexistence, man-machine, these types of things, so that we can always maintain a lineage with the research that we already produced, because otherwise that'd be very dangerous, I think. We would not be able to see whether all the assumptions don't hold. We have to maintain that lineage. Otherwise, we can never say like, well, is this new thing? Well, maybe our old theories inform that. They probably do to some extent. Yeah. So I think it's really important to maintain that line of what we've been doing, but just try to be a little bit more exploratory and see where else it might apply, other than just the same old models of the same old types of technologies and systems using the same old metrics and measures that we've developed so far. And I'm seeing here Manfred, so what about consistency between the conceptual models maintained by different agents? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's a nice example of a different type of very important dependent variable that we could look at, right? So we have conceptual models maintained by different agents. So if I go back to my sports betting example, I would wager that the conceptual model of the domain, EA the sports bet, is very different from that engine that scrapes the data from the CN or some other sports web page to the one that's being run to make the Oracle agent feed. And the question is, if we know that they're different, how do we actually map that? How do we make that consistent? So how do we make sure that when there's a change here, it gets propagated properly to the other one and vice versa? Hans-Georg, it seems that your answers are based on analyzing the IS outlet, not covering ER models, SOSIM, and others. Yes. Absolutely, yeah. There will definitely be bias. There's certainly limitations. Simple answer. So I am an IS scholar, I suppose, doing conceptual modeling, and my view of that is sort of skewed and biased by that perspective. Absolutely. You may have noticed also that I talk a fair bit about empirical stuff. I didn't mean to, but that's just the area that I'm more familiar with. Having said that, I know all these outlets, and I know a lot of the work that has been done there. So, you know, it's a little bit what I mean with there's some value in this heterogeneity, but it's also we gotta be careful that we don't make it out to be very different camps. I think we're all trying to do the same things. We just happen to be in little different parts, and we don't really talk to one another all that much, except of course here where we do when we come together. The teaching of IS behind the times. Again, I'm very biased. In the last 8 years, I've taught in business schools. And the IS curriculum in business schools is certainly behind the times, that's for sure. I don't know. I would, the skeptic in me would say yes, but you know, then again, that's probably the nature of things. So we can't just change our teaching every time there's a new fad coming out. So there's always going to be a little bit of a lag behind. And I think one way forward would be that I think we need to change our research gears a little bit. And if some of that new or change in research direction proves useful and sort of robust, then I think we should worry about translating that in our teaching. Yeah, so I wouldn't just go and change all my, my lecture slides tomorrow already. We will have to see how whether what we produce in research is really fundamentally challenging whatever it is that we teach in conceptual modeling. So far we don't know. Judith, you have introduced with CM scripts a new level above a conceptual modeling in your conceptual model in your understanding. Isn't it possible to describe the graph again using a grammar? Absolutely. Is it needed, especially for constructive purposes? I'm not entirely sure I follow that question, but what I think you're saying is, there's always, we can model all sorts of scripts, yeah. And some of these scripts you may call being produced by domain-specific language, but you see, what I meant to say is, to me, these are all just models. We always model some part of reality because we always abstract certain things. We always leave certain things out and highlight other things, and we do so using certain semantical rules. Sort of which dots get connected to dots. So it's a pretty relaxed view of, so everything that has boxes and arrows in them could be a conceptual model. And everything that we write about and describe is, in a way, is a model. Yeah. Some of that we use languages that are, very close to being very general purpose languages, like English and so forth. But some of them are a little bit more formal. But that has been the case all the time. We always had more and less formal methods and grammars for modeling. To me, it's just a little bit more of the same. Could you shortly define script? Yes, of course. So script is the terminology that is from Wundt and Weber. So what they mean with a script is, I think, what most other people would simply call the model, the conceptual model. Yeah. So the diagram that we produce. They call it a script because they have that terminology that is based on sort of language. They say, well, in languages we have a grammar, and the grammar produces sentences, and sentences are scripts, and the set of all scripts is a language. Yeah. So that's where that comes from. It's not really, it's a bit of a, I don't know. Yeah. So it's a model. I use the word script because to provide a lineage back to this original paper. Piece of text. Yeah, piece of text, piece of drawing, piece of diagram, and so forth. Thomas, you state there is a physical reality and a digital reality. One could claim that the only reality is that which is in our mind. So perhaps that is what conceptual models should represent. Well, absolutely. Yeah. So I try to stay away from the question of whether or not that reality is sort of out there, whether it's been socially or individually constructed. But in a way, again, that doesn't matter. I can draw a conceptual model of whatever I think is happening or what is going on out there, or what I think about what the Oracle agent does in this bet sports example. Of course I can do that. Yeah. And in a way, whenever there's human agents, necessarily they do that in the same way that when we have a digital agent that has also been sort of constructed by humans based on certain assumptions and views and so forth. So it's also only modeling the world based on certain other models that they have. So yeah, absolutely. That's basically what we're doing anyway, whether or not we call it that.
Yeah, I think so. All right. Thank you, Jan. Thank you again for the very thought-provoking keynote, and thank you for answering all these questions. Thank you also to the audience for attending and for asking those interesting questions. I'd like to draw this session to a close then, and I'd like to remind you that after the break, we will start with our first technical or main conference session on business process modeling. And at the same time, we have our first tutorial towards foundations of conceptual modeling. On the Hopin platform, you will see these sessions pop up about 10-15 minutes prior to their time in the sessions tab, and you can hop in at any time that you like. During the breaks, we have the networking open. As Jeff said earlier, that's a little bit like speed dating. You don't quite know what you're getting, but it is short. And you can also use the Hopin platform to, of course, chat with specific people and even video call with specific people. So please make use of the platform, and I hope to see you all around the various sessions throughout the next 3 days. Thank you very much.